Thank you for joining today's webinar. I'm Tariq Allana, the Associate Director of Art Heritage. As we near the conclusion of the exhibition Bombay Talkies, photographs from the Josef Wirsching Collection at the Jaipur Centre of Art, which is a new contemporary art institute founded by His Highness Maharaja Savai Padmanabhan Singh in collaboration with the curator Noel Kader, I am thrilled to serve as the host of this webinar. Our goal today is to provide some context for the exhibition in Jaipur that runs in parallel with the film program currently ongoing there. And as I mentioned, that's curated by Dr. Shwetal Patel. And to provide a brief introduction to the Josef Wirsching Collection. I don't think we have enough time to go into depth. And we'll be doing this through the eyes of Wirsching's grandsons, Josef and George Wirsching, who serve as the archive's custodians. A few housekeeping matters before we begin. If you're using a mobile phone, you may want to get a better view by moving your phone to the landscape mode. If you are on a desktop or a laptop, you may want to maximize the zoom window because we'll have some slides through the presentation. If you have any questions, please place them in the Q&A box, not the comment box. As they come up, we'll address them either during the course of the conversation or at the very end. This webinar runs about 40 minutes and it is being recorded. Given our diverse audience, I'll just take a few minutes, not even a few minutes, to provide a brief introduction to Art Heritage that is located in New Delhi. Art Heritage is a gallery that was started in 1977 by the late Roshan and Ibrahim Al-Qazi. Our current director is Amal Allana. Rooted in education, our founders utilize the gallery space to showcase young and emerging artists as well as mid-career artists and to bring new insights into the works of the masters. Art Heritage treats every exhibition as a unique event, transforming the physical space in the gallery to a design that is specifically meant to enhance the aesthetics and the content of the exhibited work. The rework space enables our patrons to experience the artworks and the themes buried within them. Almost every exhibition is accompanied by an or physical catalog. These publications are authored by scholars in the field who put the work of the artist and their medium in the context of the larger art ecosystem currently at play in India. 48 seasons later, Art Heritage catalogs serve as a compendium of the Indian art movement. Let's move on to why we're all here, which is the Wirsching Collection. Many of you are familiar, I'm sure, with the Wirsching Collection, which is a rare and rich archive of the very early days of the Hindi movie industry. The collection had its inaugural show at the Serendipity Arts Festival in Goa in 2017, supported in part by the Al-Qazi Foundation for the Arts. Portions of the collection have also been shown at the Lalit Kala Academy in Chennai, supported by the Goethe Institute and the CPB Foundation. And in 2024, there was an exhibition of the collection at the Jahangir Nicholson Gallery at the CSMVS Museum in Mumbai. At the time of that exhibition, the one in Mumbai, we were also able to screen one of the Bombay Talkie movies, and needless to say, the cinematography was done by Josef Wirsching. That movie was Kangan, and it was screened at Regal Cinema just for one day. Art Heritage has been connected to the Wirsching archive since 2018. We have showcased the work and also made some of them available for acquisition at both the India Art Fair and in the gallery itself. In addition to the exhibitions, the collection has been deeply researched, and Mappin and the Al-Qazi Collection of Photography have brought out a publication, which you see over my right shoulder, called Bombay Talkies, The Unseen History of Indian Cinema. It's edited by Columbia University professor Debashri Mukherjee. This publication is now part of the catalogue of the Margaret Herrick Library Collection, which is a reference and research institution of the Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts and Sciences, which, as you know, hosts the Oscars. The book was also discussed at the Camera South Asia Symposium at Columbia University in 2023. At this symposium, the well-known movie director Meera Nair reflected on the impact and influence of Josef Wirsching's cinematography on Indian cinema and indeed her own films. Furthermore, given the connection to Germany, Josef and George Wirsching were invited in 2024 to the residence of the German ambassador in New Delhi to speak about the collection. I just have a few images to share, which I'd like to do right now on some of these that have happened. So that's, of course, the show in Jaipur. This is the show that happened at Serendipity in 2017. I'm just showing you two images here. There's a much larger collection of them on the Serendipity website. This is the show that we had at Lalit Kala. This is the Art Heritage Show. In our show, we actually were able to also have a little bit of a video playing in the background for a month and a half of, as many of you may have seen the reel that we put up. It's the Helen dancing and actually approaching Josef Wirsching in a cameo role. This is the show in Bombay that was done at the CSMVS. Some installation shots there. This is the Akazi Foundation put up a hoarding during the showing of Kangan. And you can see images from the Wirsching collection on the left and right of the police van. But feel rest assured, there was no need for the police to show up. But that is what, it was just the truck that was standing there. This is the Baitak that happened at the German ambassador's residence in 2024. The book at the Margaret Herrick Library. And of course, I circle back to the Jaipur Centre for Art show that's currently ongoing. I'm going to transition to Georg and Josef Wirsching. So I think maybe before we begin, going into the archive, I think it would be interesting for people to know about how Josef Wirsching actually made it to India. That, I think, is an important question. And how did he make his way into cinematography and then his way to India? So, George, maybe you can start us off with that introduction.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Tariq. Essentially, to start with, when Joseph was about 16 years old, this was in 1920-ish, he was gifted a still film camera by his father on his 16th birthday. And with this, he developed an ardent love for film, for the new emerging art of film. And he was essentially a hobby photographer, and it developed these ardent, ambition to actually start studying cinematography, the art of moving pictures. So that's when in about 1921, 22, he joined the Blau-Weiß Film Trade School in Germany and learned the basics of filmmaking, after which he joined Imelka Film Studios in 1922-23 as an assistant cameraman, and quickly rose up the ranks to become a full-fledged lead cameraman. And then in 1924, you could say, Himanshu Rai approached Imelka Film Studios after being rejected by numerous film studios in England. He approached Imelka with the idea of making a beautiful silent film on the life of Buddha, which was to be entitled The Light of Asia, which was again based on a poem by Edwin Arnold, rewritten by his good friend Ranjan Pal, the scriptwriter. So, Imelka heard him out, and they said, yes, we could definitely produce this picture for you, but they had a few stipulations. They said, to make this film purely authentic and to look like an Indian film, you will need to provide an authentic Indian cast of actors, which Himanshu said, I'm going to be acting as Lord Buddha himself. They said, excellent. And you have the rest of the cast, which he did. And they also said, you have to provide us with authentic Indian locales to shoot the film. So otherwise, building sets would be prohibitively expensive. And at the same time, you would also need to fund the entire production of the film, which at that point of time in 1924 cost around ₹1,00,000, which was billed as the most expensive silent film made world over. So that was when Josef Wirsching came to India with the crew that was assigned to by America, which was Joseph as the lead cameraman, Franz Austin as the director, Willy Kiermaier as the assistant cameraman, and Bartis Schultes as the producer / translator. So in 1924, 25, 24, when Joseph first stepped into the Jaipur Palace, he obviously was welcomed and asked, like, and told by the court astrologer, welcome back, Huzur. He said, I've never been to India. And then he says, no, you were in a previous life. Nevertheless, the Maharaja of Jaipur was an ardent fan of the entire craft of filmmaking, and he fully supported the entire production of the movie, which was shot completely on location, on site in the Jaipur Palace, with the Maharaja's support, by also directing his entire court as well as the residents of Jaipur to help along the way with the production of the film, which they did. And then finally, America also said that you do all of this, and we will process the film and distribute it worldwide. To which also Himanshu agreed. So hence, after the filming of the footage in Jaipur, the film was developed in Nainital because of the cold temperatures and the water, etc. Then the film was cut in Germany and finally released to a worldwide release in 1925, even after the King and Queen of England gave a beautiful review of the film. It was a blockbuster in 1924-25. And at the same time, Devika, and well, after 24-25, Joseph went back to America and and continued making films. He made about 9 more feature films with him, with America, along with a long 1 year documentary travel log from Munich to Rangoon, and then 4 other films with 4 other German producers, film studios. At the same time, between 1925 to the early 30s, Himanshu Rai was also making Indian film productions with UFA Films in Berlin. That's where he met the young Devika Rani, who, well, they fell in love. She was apprenticing for the actress Malini Dietrich and apprenticing from her and learning all the basics about everything about film craft. So here's where Himanshu and Devika met. They fell in love. They got married after a wonderful showing of their film Karma, which apparently had the longest film on-screen kiss at that time. And they decided to start their own film studios in India to make international quality films, because essentially the upcoming Nazi regime in Germany was suffocating creative freedoms in Germany. So then they also approached America again, asking them for the entire support and advice of how to go ahead and put together a studio, and also which America obviously gave them the entire list of equipments, blueprints, etc., of how to create the studio spaces, everything. And they also requested if Josef Wirsching and Franz Osten, who Himanshu had already worked with on Light of Asia, could join them along with 2 other German technicians to be the backbone, the filmmaking backbone of Bombay Talkies. And they agreed. So then in 1934, Himanshu Rai and Devika Rani were able to start Bombay Talkies with the support of the film crew that came from Germany.
So with that, I'm just going to transition and introduce Shwetal. Dr. Shwetal Ashvin Patel is a writer and researcher practicing at the intersection of visual art, exhibition making, and development studies. He works internationally, primarily in Europe and South Asia, and is a founding member of the Kochi Muzris Biennale in India, responsible for international partnerships and programs. He holds a practice-based PhD from the Winchester School of Art, University of Southampton, where his thesis was entitled Biennale Practices Making and Sustaining Visual Art Platforms. He is a guest lecturer at institutions including Zurich University of Arts, Royal College of Art, and Exeter University, besides being a trustee of the Milton Keynes Museum, Coventry Biennale, and Kakkar Centre for Psychoanalysis and Culture. He lives between the United Kingdom, Belgium, and India. And with that, Shwetal, I'll pass it on to you to provide a reflection on the bridge between still and moving images.
But it was really interesting listening to George about the early history, and of course how the Jaipur City Palace was involved in that early history. Quite interesting that the exhibition comes back almost more than 100 years later. So it's really interesting. As I was saying, artist cinema. I come from the visual arts world. and lots of artists are working in moving image, increasingly so. But I think since the advent of the medium itself, let's say visual artists, and I don't want to make too much of a fine point on this, but artists who are working in more traditional media, painting, drawing, sculpture, etc., turn of the century in Paris, in Europe, began experimenting with moving image, and the canon of art has been greatly enhanced by the introduction of the medium. Of course, these works end up in museums, they end up in galleries, they end up in biennials, they end up in exhibition context, let's say, what we might call a black box generally. And that's quite distinct from auteur cinema, which is meant for the theater, for cinemas, for television, and so on. And of course, we've all grown up loving cinema, and I would put Josef Wirsching in that latter category as an auteur cinema filmmaker. And I've often felt my favorite film directors or auteur directors, make art and make art of the highest form. But of course, the reception and how they're received and consumed is really different. And of course, how we theorize, cinema and how we theorize artwork. So there is this kind of divide between artists working in moving image and artists working in cinema, if you like. So I wanted to blur the boundaries in this program, artist cinema, and actually bring these two, I would say, genres really, in the same, in the same room, in the same gallery. And of course, Noel and JCA and the Maharaja were very, very supportive of this. There was a great sort of enthusiasm when I suggested this. Of course, this is the first time we're doing it. And then subsequently to that, a wonderful suggestion from Noel to include this exhibition. And I jumped at the idea, and Tariq and I had a wonderful conversation around how these two things could be in conversation. The artist cinema program, over 150 films, very well-known directors to very emerging directors to very overlooked directors, artists, again, emerging artists, very senior artists. And, what we've tried to do is program throughout the day from 2 in the afternoon till about 8 in the evening. We start off with experimental, or what we might call moving image or video art works by contemporary artists. And then we have a matinee, and then we have an evening film where we tend to show feature films. We've been really fortunate to work with the French Institute, with the Goethe Institute of Film Heritage, Film Critics Guild, and MUBI. And the latter partnership with MUBI allowed us to show Wim Wenders, Wong Kar-wai, Achipung Virisol, and some other directors, Mati Diop and others. So it's been a really interesting program. And I think the exhibition and the film work very well together. And I hope audiences get a sense of the history of cinema in India. And from my understanding, the artistry that was involved. The kind of painstaking artistry right from the director downwards. So everybody who was involved. When you mentioned Marlene Dietrich, I think of, Weimar, Germany, and I think of all the creativity that was going on there, not just in this emerging field of cinema, but in painting and sculpture and in architecture and so on. And I think that let's say being a slightly romantic, miss that a little bit. I feel that when, making film is a kind of collective artistic endeavor. And from your script to your score, to the cinematography, to your set design, and all of those things coming together. And I, of course, think of Satyajit Ray, who started off as a sort of photographer, short story writer, illustrator, and eventually, one of the great filmmakers of the 20th century, and absolutely an artist. And so this was really, and coming back to Josef Wirsching, again, when the more I learn about him and his legacy, but not just him, his entire, ensemble, if you like, there was a kind of great level of artistry and conceptual nature, the execution, the quality of the project, to me, I think is something that probably in the professionalization of cinema over the years, maybe, it's become a little more formulaic, let's say, certainly much more commercial. And so I really felt it was going to be a really interesting sort of, these two things together. And lastly, I would just like to say that, why are archives like this important? I think because, there's obviously a lot of work going into film restoration, film preservation, photographic archives. I think this is extremely important, not just from a scholarly perspective, but also from an artistic perspective. So to have these two things together was really fantastic.
Yeah. Thank you, Shwetal. I really appreciate that. I think though we had planned for you to speak before we went into the Wirsching archive, I think this point that you've made actually leads us very nicely into talking about the transition that Josef Wirsching made in a more permanent way, I think, George, from Germany into India. So, I mean, we've covered, he came to India in 1924-25. He, with the Light of Asia, then he was back in Germany and working there. And then at the behest of Himanshu Rai and Devika Rani comes to help set up with a team of other technicians, the Bombay Talkies studio. So maybe that's where we can transition, George, and have a little bit of a brief on that initial setup of Bombay Talkies. Let's start there.
Excellent. So, as I was saying, Himanshu and Devika teamed together to start their own studio, film studio here in India, which they called Bombay Talkies. So, essentially what Himanshu did was he was able to get funding by convincing a lot of wealthy businessmen in Bombay to fund this entire project. And so essentially in 1934 to be precise, actually, they had, one of the shareholders had a huge sprawling mango estate in Malad, upon which they built the Bombay Talkies film studios. So now, the thing is, the Bombay Talkies film studios, it was started obviously in 34-35 with the aim of not just making films, but training a whole team of new Indian filmmakers who were the assistants of Joseph and all the other sound technicians, lab technicians, set designers. Everybody, they were like this team of Indian artists were learning the entire process and art of filmmaking from this entire crew of German technicians. And over the span of, those many years, they made numerous movies. But the beauty about the Bombay Talkies setup was it was a perfect, complete in-house filmmaking establishment, complex, you could say. They had 3 beautiful, huge studio spaces, sound stages, soundproofed sound stages. They had laboratories, dark rooms, screening rooms. They had costumeries, tailoring departments, dressing rooms for the artists, canteens. They had everything. They even had an entire dedicated transformer with a main power line coming from the grid only to the studio, so that they would have uninterrupted power during the productions. And they even had their own on-call doctor in their own in-house clinic in the studio complex. And obviously, over the span of the numerous years that Bombay Talkies was working, they made quite a few beautiful films, which
let me
it has to start somewhere.
Yeah, so, let me stop you there. I think maybe Joseph, you can give us a sense of the beginnings of the movies. Some of the initial movies and some details about them.
Sure. If you look at it, the first movie which they did was Jawani Ki Hawa, and Devika Rani was she was an established star, because she had already learned from Marlene Dietrich, so she knew the craft. The Bombay Talkies went through a very exhaustive selection process to find the male lead, which was Najmal Hussain. And they did Jawani Ki Hawa together and another two other movies. But what happened was there was this bit of an intense on-screen as well as off-screen chemistry between both of them, which finally turned into an affair, and a scandalous one to boot, where they both went to Calcutta, eloped to Calcutta. Shashadhar was sent as a troubleshooter to get Devika back, which he did. And Najmal Hussain, pretty much his career died at that point of time because he was banned from Bombay Talkies, blackballed, so to speak. But just because it was his star had crashed and burned, didn't mean that the studio was going to suffer. This is where Ashok Kumar showed up. The making of the first Indian male superstar, so to speak, the bankable star, right? So he was an assistant to my grandfather, a lab tech, and he had shown, he'd shown like a positive view on some of the test shots which they had taken because the studio used a lot of the people that were working for them as extras or as atmosphere in places to fill up the screen. So Ashok tested very well, and then afterwards they said, why not use him? And this is when Ashok Kumar started off with Achut Kanya, their first movie together, right? And then after that, all I can say is the rest is more or less history. And they did movies together all until, well, 1939 was some good news and bad news for my grandfather. The good news was that he had become a father, and the bad news was when just after he discovered that he was the father and my father was born, my grandfather was the war broke out, and being a German citizen, right, he was interned in various internment camps. Like the first one was Devlali, then after was Dehradun, and finally in Ahmednagar, where he stayed for 5 years apart from his family until 1944, where the families were reunited. And my grandfather went from Ahmednagar along with all the other male members of the Germans and Italians down to Satara to be reunited with their families. And it was after 5 years that my grandfather actually got to see his son, you know. And after that, he more or less, the war ended, and well, Granddad had a choice. He could go back to Germany, where there was nothing left, or stay back in India and continue the legacy which he was building.
Yeah, so maybe George, take us through after being reunited with his family. I mean, he starts making movies again. Maybe walk us through what that period was post the war. Yeah.
Yeah, well, essentially in 1944, because the children at the women and children's camp were getting too much out of control, my father, one of them included, the parents were reunited. And after Joseph was reunited with his family in 1944, the war essentially ended in 45, but still they were retained in the internment camps because they were either meant to be repatriated back to Germany, or if they could find employment in the offices or places where they were arrested from, in the countries that they were arrested from, they would be allowed to go back, because India became the main internment camp for all of the colonial countries east of the Suez Canal, which arrested Axis-powered nationals like Germans, Italians, Poles, and Austrians. They were all sent to India, Ahmednagar to be precise. So between 45 to 47, a lot of these people were being repatriated. And because Joseph Wirsching's family home in Germany was completely bombed out in 1944, there was nothing for him to go back to. So he approached Bombay Talkies in 1947, and they, at that point of time, had already gone through a whole change in their own management, because we know that Himanshu Rai passed away in 1940, and because of a lot of changes in the management, Devika Rani sort of withdrew from the running of the entire studio, and hence Sashadhar, Ashok, and all of them basically took over the entire running of the studios, etc. So when Joseph came back in 1947, the management had changed. All of the actors, actresses had all changed, but they, wholeheartedly welcomed him back. And there he made quite a few good films. Six films he made with them from 1947 until 59, when they gradually closed down. The most famous of which was Mahal. which was billed as India's first horror film, which again he used quite a lot of interesting cinematic special effect techniques. But anyways, even during that time when Bombay Talkies was gradually closing down over the latter half of 1950s, he also made approximately 27 color as well as black and white documentary and educational films for the USIS and NCERT in association with a film company, a documentary film company called Arma Limited, which are also photographic equipment suppliers in Bombay. And then towards the end of 58-ish kind of thing, he was approached by Kamalam Rohi, who he had already met in the second half of Bombay Talkies from 1947 onwards, and obviously made Mahal with him. So Kamal, at that point in time, approached Joseph and said, would you like to be the director of photography for my new studio, which I've just started? It's called Mahal Pictures, also known as Mahal Films, also known as Kamal Pictures. So to this, Joseph immediately jumped and said yes. So essentially from 1958, he was 58, 59, he was working with Kamalam Rohi. He made two films for them. One was the famous black and white film Dil Apna Preet Parai, which had the beautiful Meena Kumari in it. And then shortly after that, they launched, this was released in 1960. Shortly after that, they started on the production of Pakiza, which went on, as you know, for an inordinate amount of time before it was finally released in 1972. There was a break in filming for a few years from 1964, 65-ish to 1970 because of Meena Kumari's ill health. But unfortunately, what had happened was in 1967, Josef Wirsching's wife, Charlotte Wirsching, had suddenly, I mean, she had been suffering from cancer for many years, but she became really ill and she passed away. And 2 weeks later, Joseph passed away she passed away from cancer. Joseph passed away from cardiac arrest. And that was when our father Joseph Wolfgang Peter Wirsching essentially inherited, all of Joseph's possessions and all of his equipments, etc. in India.
So let's talk about, I mean, we've talked about him coming to India, having this thriving practice as a cinematographer, having to take a break because of the war, then getting back to being a cinematographer. I mean, this is a lot of history, but I think what I'm also curious to know is, we haven't talked yet about the archive. So how did the archive actually come about? Where did that come? Joseph, maybe you can help us understand that.
The archive started off during the filming of Pakiza, because Grandad had a lot of these breaks in between filming. He started sitting down and accumulating all his life's work, his body of work. So it started off all the way from the photographs which he took as a youngster, the 16-year-old youngster that was given a still film camera. He had all of those pictures. So we have pictures of Germany, of Garmisch, and his holidays when he was a young man. And then there is the whole journey, the Asian journey, which George was talking about. Then there is his entire professional shots of the Bombay Talkies movies, and then there's the behind the scenes, the candid ones, that section, and then we also have got like 40 years of ethnographic material of Grandad's, which he just randomly took when going hunting for scouting for locations, or or just taking pictures of a random festival. So he was very prolific in his work, and we have honestly only scanned just his film work. We still have a lot to go through, right? And the archive was born when he was slowly putting everything in that box during the holidays of Pakiza, because slowly towards 1967, when Grandma passed away, and then Grandad just passed away like 2 weeks later, right? My father came back home. Everything was packed in neat in that box. Apart from his equipment, his legacy was in that box, which we carried with us wherever we traveled. Until finally, Georgie and me were, we were old enough to understand the value of what was in the box when we went to college. Dad opened it up and he showed us the glamour shots and the film stills. and apart from the standard albums of our past. That is when Georgie and me decided, like, we really need to have a look at this. And thankfully, digitization had landed on our in front of us, and we were able to take everything and do it properly. If we were to do most of this traditionally, like sticking it into a negative carrier, we would have lost a lot of stuff because it was flammable nitrates. But thanks to digitization, we're able to show the world 100 years worth of film.
Well, let's just take a step back. So I think what I understand is that you all were introduced to this archive based on just your father opening up the trunk every time you all traveled, the steel trunk you all traveled with. The first introduction was more of the glamour shots that you saw. But I think, George, as you started to scan the stuff, as Joseph mentioned, as you started to scan the negatives and so on, just give us a broader picture of what we started to see, what you started to see.
Yeah. Well, to put a little bit of more context into what Joseph was saying, when my father used to occasionally open up the box to check out the contents, the condition of the contents therein, he used to show us only these lobby cards. There was about some 100+ lobby cards, which were essentially the main publicity stills which the studios used to put out in the lobby of the theaters where the pictures were being made. So with that, we sort of got to understand that, yes, our grandfather was a pioneering filmmaker, in a German filmmaker in India. So hence, we also studied visual communications in college and learned the basics of black and white photography, darkroom work, art, design, graphic design, etc. So because we knew one day we would have to do something with this material, so we at least, got our, facts and information and techniques proper. And then finally in 2009, as Joe mentioned, digitization was possible. We essentially invested into getting high resolution scanners, negative scanners, computers, proprietary softwares, etc. And then for roughly about a couple of years, from 2009 onwards to about 2010-11, I sat and scanned all of the material that we had pertaining to the Indian cinematic imagery. So apart from what we saw in the lobby cards, my God, Tariq, when I tell you what was opening, what was emerging every day with each new scan from all the rolls of negatives, were images like this, of the background scenes, of the studios. It gives me goosebumps to think about it, of the studios, of all of the people involved, the entire, beauty of the craft of filmmaking was finally seen. Because publicity stills will never show you. I mean, studios will never show you this. They'll only show you the clean, publicity photographs which people are meant to see. But nobody sees the background, what goes on in the background of filmmaking. And this was completely unprecedented for us. And that was what we made available. And incidentally, we put a few of them up on a on a blog spot in 2010, and in 2013 we were contacted by Debashree Mukherjee, who is the editor of our book, and she was researching Bombay Talkies for her PhD thesis, and she contacted me and wished to come and meet us and interview us. So then she essentially came down 2013 August, September, if I'm not mistaken, spent a whole week visiting us, interviewing my father, who was alive that time, and me, and I spent hours every day just showing her all of the photographs. So keeping all of this in mind, she went and mentioned all of this to the Al-Qazi Foundation. And in 2016, during the first edition of the Serendipity Festival, Rahab from from the Al-Qazi Foundation, along with his dear mother, Dr. Amal, as well as his father, Dr. Nisar, they visited our home in Goa and met my mom. My dad had just passed away that year, a few months earlier. But they spent an entire evening, and I showed them all of the material that we have in the collection that I had digitized till then, and told them the stories of whatever we had. They were so mystified and taken aback by the quality of the imagery that we had, that the only thing Dr. Amal said to her son Rahab that evening was, we have to do something positive with this collection. And correctly, 1 year later, serendipitously, we had our first exhibition in Goa, Serendipity 2017. And after that, the rest is history, as
Fantastic.
Tariq has already mentioned.
Yeah. So, I mean, now that has been translated, as I mentioned in my opening, into a book as well. Joseph, can you give us a sense of the book and how that came about? I mean, a lot of this material has come into that. So give us a sense of that.
Let's bandy that word serendipitously again. We launched that book at the Jaipur Lit Festival 99 years after my grandfather put his foot in that city.
Wow.
Literally, you know. So it was in 1924 that he had come down to shoot the movie, 1925 that the movie was released, right? But the 1923, 2023, the year we launched the book, we managed to get it in time before that 100-year cycle ended. Because Granddad, the book for us launching in Jaipur was a very emotional moment, because it's where it started. It finally was one full round circle, 100 years, right? The book contains a lot of photographs of Bombay Talkies, about the stars, the background pictures. It gives you an idea of, it's got a lot of academic essays, and it's edited by Debashri. So we've managed to keep it picture heavy, and for all those people that will be interested in the academic angle, there is enough for you to read about the studio and its functioning, and its legacy of what it is left right now with us, with modern cinema as well. So all I'd like to say is, like, 100 years later, Prem Sannyas was launched, right? 100 years later, Granddad again, through his lens, still comes up and at Jaipur, where his pictures are shown. And like Georgie said, when my grandfather was, when he had first come to Jaipur, the court astrologer came up to him and said, "Welcome, welcome home, Sahib." And my grandfather was shocked. And he said, "But I'm not Indian, I'm a German." He said, "Well, this used to be your home at one point of time." So I feel it's very serendipitous that we've arrived in Jaipur after 100 years.
Yeah, no, I will certainly say, for those in Jaipur, I mean, it's a wonderful story that's connecting is the through line to a lot of what you all have talked about. And I'd encourage people who are in Jaipur to certainly visit the show if they have an opportunity. We have 2 copies of the book there as well, if people want to leaf through it. I think it covers multiple things, Joseph, in addition to what you've said, just that conversion of a private collection into a public archive, a lot of the interplay between the behind the scenes photographs and the in-front production stills, as well as the making of Devika Rani, Madhubala, and Meena Kumari. I think it has a lot of content that addresses these matters as well. And I think the source material, being the Wirsching archive, permits it. I mean, I remember when we were in Bombay, one of the questions that Debashri was asked when she was talking was about whether we are actually building an archive of Bollywood as of today, going forward. And I think that there's a mixed response to that. Yes, in some cases, but maybe not as methodical as one would, as is there in your collection, actually. So I think we've exceeded our 40 minutes. But I'd like to thank everybody, Shwetal, George, and Joseph, for coming and really talking about the exhibition in the context of the ongoing film program, as well as giving us a glimpse, a very small glimpse. I mean, I think we can go on for hours, but a very small glimpse into the making of the Wirsching archive, which starts with that very first camera that Josef Wirsching picked up when he was 16 years old. I think that's fantastic.
Gifted to it,
I think I'll take a minute if there are a few questions while we wait. George, I'll just ask you a quick question, which is, in addition to images, is there other kinds of stuff that is there in the collection? I mean, I know at some of these exhibitions, I've seen little pamphlets, movie pamphlets. So if you can talk just briefly about that as we wait.
Yeah. Well, thankfully, what my grandmother did was she held on to the original film synopsis booklets of about 7 to 8 of the first few Bombay Talkies films, And these were the original film booklets that were sold in the theater, in the cinema halls and theaters. And they were roughly about 12 to 16 pages, about an A5 size. And they had the entire synopsis of the movie in English, Hindi, Gujarati, as well as the lyrics for all of the songs in English, Hindi, and Gujarati, as well as photographs that were used as the lobby cards of that film. So we have about about 7 or 8 of them. Plus, we also have like a couple of albums of newspaper cuttings and magazine reviews, which my grandmother used to cut out and maintain in this album, mentioning the movies that were being reviewed and Josef Wirsching's role in that film, etc. So there's all of that as well. And yeah, so there's, well, a lot more other material, as I mentioned, in the form of negatives, which we hope to bring to the public in future publications and exhibitions through, obviously, Art Heritage, the Al-Qazi Foundation, and anybody else who would love to have our work there, like the JCA, etc. So yeah,
Fantastic.
thank you.
Thank you. So you have answered all the questions. No, but there are no questions outstanding. But really appreciate it. Thank you again. And to those who joined, please continue to follow our future exhibitions with the Wirsching Collection. And thanks for joining the webinar. Have a good evening, everyone.